Hey everybody, I am outside enjoying the nice weather today, and I wanted to show you how to create an animated GIF. You can do that in Photoshop. It's actually relatively simple. It just requires a certain organization of thought in order to do it successfully and without too much frustration. It does take time. As with all things in art and creation, the more time you can put into it, the better the result will be. Now, granted, all these exercises I've shown you have been pretty quick and simple. Even the ones that I've fast forwarded through to show you the process haven't really taken that long. I've been able to do them in one sitting. Art generally takes more than one sitting, especially if you're doing something for any type of professional use. So don't judge what we're doing by that standard. Recognize the fact that what we're doing together here is an overview of the process. It's a way to get your feet wet, get you thinking about how to do it, and then how far you take it is really essentially up to you. So what I'm going to show you here is a GIF that I created that took me a couple of hours to produce. I'm going to walk you through some of the steps that I took so you can see what I did. Then I'm going to do another one, and it's going to be much simpler than this one. It will be something with fewer moving parts. What I wanted to show you is something that's a standard amongst animation students. It's a great way to get you thinking about movement, is the bounce, squish, and stretch. Those three things are what my object here is going to be doing. Someone you might want to consider looking up is a fellow by the name of Eadweard Muybridge. Look up his motion studies. It's something I'm also talking to my Drawing 1 class about, because we were doing gesture drawing, and just his study of movement is profound. Just tons and tons of photographs of people and animals in motion, just to get an idea of what kind of things need to change, displacement of weight, alteration of shape, whenever you're creating an animation. Now this one that I made is just a simple ball, like that sphere that we created whenever we did the first digital painting tutorial. So here I'm going to hit play on my GIF, and you can see the ball bounces and then disappears and rolls in from the right side. I'll let this play a couple times through, and you can see the different things that are happening here. It's coming from off the page, it's landing, squishing down and bouncing upward and stretching, and then disappearing into the ceiling or into some kind of portal, and then rolling in from the right side. So in order to do this, in order to create this animation, I had to take several steps. You can see down here, this is my timeline, and these are all the frames for my animation. There are 36 of them. Could I have done it in fewer frames? Perhaps. If I had done it in more, maybe it would be a more fluid transition. If I come over here into my layers palette, you can see I have my bottom frame visible right now. Now I'm going to go up and make each one visible and tell you what I did here. Now, of course, I created that background the same way we did when we did the sphere paintings. I just added color to it. I have my gradient there, I have my surface here, and that is my backdrop for everything. If I bring in the second one, you see I've started to bring the sphere in. I created the sphere and I painted it, and I had it in a separate layer before I merged it down, and then I have it over here coming in off the left side, and you can see I've got a little shadow right here. I decided to throw a shadow in. You don't have to go to this trouble, it's just something I wanted to show you. If you decide you want to try this, these would be the steps to take in order to achieve this. So then I'm going to the next frame. You see the ball's a little further in, as is the shadow. Fourth frame, I've moved it even further in. Shadow is larger. Now the ball is fully visible. And each time I did this, I was always looking at where the ball was last and then moving it just slightly. And that requires a certain organization of thought to do this. You really have to think about where you're placing things, how many layers you have. You should always have 2 copies of all of the components that you are animating. So you have the set you will be flattening and merging into a single frame, but then you'll have a set of copies for the next one, so that whenever you finish a frame, you then again Command J and copy each of those elements, and then work with the first set that you have, the first set of copies, until you have those where you want them, merge them, then you make another copy of the copy set. So you're always working with 2 of them. That way you never get to the point where you're like, oh, I did all this, I merged everything together, and now I no longer have my sphere, my shadow, and my background in their own isolated layers because they've been merged, so I can't create the next frame. You'll overlook that. It'll happen. You'll get into the mode, you'll be creating this, you'll be creating a frame, and then you'll go to merge it and forget to copy everything. Don't do that. Most important step in between each one of these frames is to copy each element and then make them invisible. Just act like they're not there. Make the other ones visible. Work with those. Make your new frame and then move on to the copies and copy them again before you start creating the next frame. Each subsequent frame is going to require all the disparate elements. That's why I made a point to only use 3 here. It keeps things pretty simple. Still going. Ball's bouncing. Ball's about to land. Once it makes contact with the surface, you see I squished it a little bit. See? Squish. Starting to squish. Squished it a little bit more. And I did that with the free transform. A very simple way to do that. You get your sphere in there, Command T, and then you can transform it, and you can lay it on top of the previous sphere to see how much you want to transform it. There it is, squishing even further. And now it's unsquishing. Actually, that is the same as this layer. As you figure it's squished down and then it's starting to pop back up. Popping back up a little bit more. Full sphere. Now it's raising off the ground. Now it's stretching. Now I stretched it out. I squished it before, now I'm stretching it out a little bit to show that it's moving upward and that it's a pliable sphere. It's not just a circle with no give to it. So it's still stretching out, stretching up. And see now the stretch, I did that one kind of quick. It stretched and then shot back up into its normal shape. It's no longer warped there. I think that's the sphere without any stretch to it at all, making its way up, up, further up, and now I'm starting to open up the ceiling so that I can dissolve the ball into the background, devour the ball into this portal, into another dimension, lifting higher up, cut off a chunk of it. Now it's almost gone. Ball has now been absorbed into the ceiling. The little dot is almost gone. The portal has disappeared. And now I have an empty layer, but you can see just a little bit of the ball coming off the side. I have it roll in the shadow underneath it. And there it is. So I'll backtrack and make each of these layers invisible. You see the ball make its way back off the screen. But that was 36 separate frames that I created in order to make this animated GIF. So you can see that there's a lot to it. It takes time to build these things and to create something of value. So there we are back to our first frame. And you can see down here on my timeline, which I'll show you how to create this. I have all my frames down here, and then I have options within each frame underneath where I can change the amount of delay between the first and then the second frame and so on all the way down. You can actually change that so that you can slow it down or speed it up. And you can change how many times it loops, and there are a lot of other options in here as well. But that's the idea with creating this. It's very simple animation. It isn't incredibly smooth, but it's good enough for our purposes. We might refer to these separate frames as our keyframes, meaning each one is very important to the overall experience of seeing this movement. Something that animators will do if they're creating things in this kind of an environment in order to stretch out the animation and make it more fluid is something called tweening, which is done right here. And the tweening allows you to add frames in between the ones that you've created to sort of smooth it out. Sometimes it looks good, sometimes it needs a little tweaking. Needless to say, the process is detail-oriented and requires a lot of forethought. In fact, I would recommend that if you're going to do your own, that you sketch out a plan in your sketchbook first. So you know exactly how many frames you want to use and what's going to happen and change in each frame. That way you have a guide for what you're doing, so you're not just going in blind and attempting to create it on the spot. You can do that if you feel very comfortable with the program, but I am a planner. I always have been, and for me, planning things out is what makes the most sense, and it's how I get the most out of what I'm doing. So That's my recommendation. Let's do one of these on our own. We're going to do something a little different, something a little simpler. But if you want to try to do this sphere animation, you know how to paint the sphere, you know how to create the background, you know how to create a shadow. So all of those elements are things you created before, and you could do something like this. It just requires you taking it one step at a time and understanding what needs to be in each frame, and then knowing how to put them all together, which is what I'm going to show you now. Okay, so you saw me create this, and you saw me create all these different parts too, all these different layers I have here, but I'm keeping them all invisible for now. And the idea was that I was making all of my components that I want to build with. Now, in terms of constituent parts, this is more complex than the sphere exercise. However, there's going to be fewer frames, and it's going to be a little bit easier because I'm not moving something from point A to point B to point C and then back. I'm just going to be moving and manipulating a couple things within the frame. And to start, I'm down here and I've sort of rearranged some of my layers here. I've got Herman and the sea here on the bottom. And remember what I mentioned, and the first thing you want to do before you start creating your frames is you want to make sure that you are copying everything that you intend to continue using. So I'm copying both Herman and the sea, putting them above, going to make both of them invisible. And then I can come down here and I can actually merge Herman down into this layer. So now this is the first frame, and I'm just going to number it 1. So that'll be my first frame. Now I have to consider what I want to do next. So again, before I go any further, I'm going to copy each of these and make sure that I have them above. As always, order of operations. Make sure we're thinking right. We've got to have a game plan in mind, and I have a very basic game plan in mind. So the next step here is to determine how Herman is going to move. So I'm working here with Herman and this copy of the C background. And let's go up here and see the things that we've added. We've got some bubbles here, which I'm going to make those visible. We've got the different flukes here. This one is the next one that I want to use. So that's going to require a little manipulation. Next up, some bubbles. We're going to want these little bubbles coming out first. And then we also have the spout. Now this is going to be a little jumpy, especially if I don't tween it. So that's something I might want to consider doing. But here we go. We've got all our component parts for the next frame visible. And what I need to do is I need to do something to Herman's tail here to make it look like it's moving. So I'm going to have to actually remove parts of this background fluke so that this one is the only one there. So how am I going to do that? Well, quite simply I'm going to use the eraser to start because Herman's in his own layer, so this shouldn't be too bad. And I'm going to just remove the part of the fluke that's behind first. And I'm actually going to remove just a little bit of his body here too, because I'm going to have to use either the smudge tool or a paintbrush in order to shore that up and make it look a little bit better. I'm going to use the smudge tool. I'm going to make it all the way up on hardness. I'm going to make it smaller so I can be more precise. And then I can just come down in here and pull that black along the edge and just try to sort of soften that out a little bit. And if you don't like it, you can always use a paintbrush to do this. But just do the best you can with what you got. Again, this is an exercise. We're not doing this for a professional animation company. We're just doing this for fun. So there, I think I've got that pretty well smoothed out. Okay, so then I'm actually going to drop all my visible layers down. My visible layers down here so that I can have them all stacked. Make sure I can see everything that I'm intending to use. Is that everything? Yes, just double checking and making sure that all of these things are the visible components for this second frame. Now remember, I'm going to have to make some copies again. So if I've already made my copies of Herman and the sea, which I did that ahead of time, right there and right there, and I'm actually not going to need this, this, or this again, because I'll actually just be able to come back and use the same frame. This is the frame where they are at that particular point. So I don't need to come back to those. I don't need to copy those. I just needed to have Herman and the sea. So I'm going to merge these down until I get to there. Call this one 2. So now I have that one and that one. So you can already see how the animation is going to start. Yeah, it's a lot of stuff happening all at once. It may be a little jittery and jumpy, but it'll look cute. You like it, you like it. That's what matters. Okay, so I've got my first 2 frames done. I want to make sure that I copy Herman and the sea one more time. Make those 2 invisible. We're working with these 2 now. And this time we're going to add in some new components. We can just kind of roll up here and figure out which ones are next. I think those are the next fluke bubbles. Yeah, these are the next fluke bubbles that we're going to need. And the next fluke we need is right there. And the bubbles for the mouth, next one's there. And then the next spout is right there. So they're all pretty much ready to go. And since I did all that preemptive planning, and I did it in a sketchbook first and figured out what I thought would look good, and then I just created all the separate components at once. Then I can come back in here and just put things where I want them, arrange them, make things visible and invisible as I go. So that's where the fluke's going next, which means I have to remove some of this Herman here with my eraser. So I'll come back in with that and just remove the tail. And remember, every time you do this, you're going to end up removing a little bit more of his body here. It looks like his tail's actually lifting up. And then come back to your smudge tool if you want, or your brush tool, whichever one works for you. Do the brush this time, just to smooth that section out. So that looks pretty good. Make sure I got my Herman and my C copy up here, and I can once again do some down merging. And this will be our third frame. Now I can turn these off and turn them back on and kind of see what the movement looks like. Alright, so now we're back to Herman and the C again, and before we do anything, remember, always copy. You never know what might go wrong, what might go awry. Make sure you have copies as you move forward with these. So now we're adding in the fluke bubbles again, the larger mouth bubbles, and the big spout. Simple enough. I can move those down. And at this point, it should start to be kind of like clockwork. You know exactly where you're going with this. So we can see the movement, and the tail goes back to its previous position. I've got these copies here if I wanted to do anything else or change anything, but I'm fine with it as it is. And so what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to ditch the extra Herman and the extra C copy, and I'm going to actually duplicate my third layer, put it above the fourth, call it 5, duplicate my second layer, put it above the 5, call it 6. Now I needed an extra fluke, but I didn't create an extra one. I should have probably made one more so that the movement on the fluke wasn't too jumpy, and I didn't plan that out as well as I should have, and that's an example of what not to do if you want to get a really smooth animation. We're going to go all the way back to our first frame. That's the one where we started. And here's the trick to creating the animation. Once you've got your frame set, you're going to go under Window, and you're going to go to Timeline. And that's going to bring up this new menu. Now you can just click on that and it'll give you a video timeline, but what we actually want to do is we want to convert frames to a frame animation. So you get that right here, this little flyout menu on the timeline itself. And so as I go, I want to add a new frame. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this one visible, that one invisible, make a new frame. Invisible, visible, make a new frame. Same thing here, make a new frame. Same thing here, new frame. Then visible, invisible, make a new frame. So when you're clicking this little thing that looks kind of like our new layer, it's creating a new frame based on whatever is visible currently. And then I need to go back in here and I need to change the timing, because right now it's set at 5 seconds, which is super slow. I want it to be a short little 0.1 second change. You see, I did that by clicking on these little areas below each frame. And I have it set to loop over and over again, so let's just see what it looks like. It's a little jittery, but it's not bad. We need to make it so that some of this maybe is a little longer. So let's stretch some of these out. Let's go back to somewhere in between. 2, 2, let's do 2 across the board. See how that looks. That's better. It's a little bit smoother. It looks a little better than what it did before. I'm liking how the bubbles are working. I think the fluke looks pretty cute. And yeah, I think that's good. So I changed my last frame to be a little bit shorter so the loop around doesn't have like a pause in it. But it's still looping. I think it looks pretty good. Maybe it needs to be tweened. And I'll just show you how tweening works so you get a sense of what it actually does. It doesn't always work for everything. Some things it makes look a little bit awkward. But just for our purposes and testing all this stuff out, we're going to do it. I have my first frame selected, and I'm going to hit this button down here. This is the tweening button. I have some options here. I'm going to add 2 frames in between to stretch this out. I'm tweening it with the next frame, which means it's going to move from frame 1 to frame 2 and sort of overlap the 2 frames in a transition. So let's see how that goes. So that means 1 and then tween, tween. So 1, 2, 3 are tween. So this is my original second frame. So I'm going to come to that one, and I'm going to tween between that and the next frame as well. Same thing as before. Hit 2, so you figure if it went from 4, 5, 6, so this would be my third. So I'm going to add 1 more set after that. It's going to give me a total of 12, so I'm doubling up from 6 to 12. Coming back to my original, and let's just see what happens here. See what the tweening does? It sort of overlaps. It makes this sort of like blur motion. Whether or not you like that, I don't know. I think it's kind of cool. So you decide if you want to do that, if you want to keep that, if you want to tween, or if you feel like you need to create more keyframes in order to make it a smoother transition, which would take some doing. I'm looking at this and trying to figure out if there's a particular point during the animation that I might want to change something or shift things around. But I can always go back if I don't like the tweening effect into my history. And you see it says where the tweens are. I can just go back to that original where I was setting my frame delay up and check it out again. I think that's honestly good enough. I think it's serving our purposes to create just a very simple frame animation. So now what? So now that you've completed your GIF, if you want to share it, this is what you have to do. What I'm going to show you isn't going to be complete because for some reason the permissions and security settings on my computer do not allow me to post a GIF in such a way that I can share it. I'm still troubleshooting that issue, but you may not have this problem depending upon what version of Mac OS or whatever operating system you're using, how old your computer is. I've been sitting here troubleshooting it for a while. I'm probably going to have to call Adobe to figure out what I have to turn off or make available in terms of permissions so that I can do this. But what I'm going to show you are the steps to take, and you can test it, and you will probably have more luck than I will. This is what we do. We go up under File, Export, Save for Web, Legacy. And we're going to get a pop-up here, New Window. Okay, and we have it set at Optimized right now. You want to make sure that you're choosing GIF 128 Dithered as your preset. Move your colors back to 256. And then you'll probably want to change the size of it because we were working at a high resolution, and that's an issue sometimes whenever you're trying to post a GIF. See, I made it 500 instead of 2400. It makes it much smaller. What you can do down here, there are some preferences you can set. You can put whichever web browser you want in there. I have mine set at Safari, and all I have to do is click Preview, and see, I can actually see what the GIF will look like if I were to post it on the web. Now, I can preview it just fine. The thing I'm having trouble figuring out how to do is save it, because when you save it, it gives you a URL which you can then post, and then the GIF will pop up. So say I were to go onto Facebook or something like that and post the URL, automatically it would generate the GIF, and then people could see the GIF and I could share it. But I'm having some permissions issue, because when I go to save, I get this pop up. Now, I would love to tell you why that's happening. I've been troubleshooting it for the last hour and a half. I don't know why it's happening. There's some setting in my computer that I need to mess with. I don't know what it is, if it's one of these security issues or something. Again, you may not have that problem. So my recommendation is that you give this a shot, create your own animated GIF just for fun if you want to, and post it online. You could even share it with me in an email if you figure out how to make the GIF work online and make it a shareable URL. If you do that and you send it to me, awesome. I'll give you like 5 bonus points. How's that sound? So just remind me in an email if you send it, hey, give me those 5 bonus points. Here's a GIF. It's not a requirement. That's what I've got for you today. I just wanted to show you how to create one of these little animated GIFs. I think they're pretty fun, don't you? Next time, I'm going to do one more digital painting. And I'm going to use the mixer brush and some dual brush. And I'm going to talk to you about the difference between direct and indirect painting and throw some terms at you. Just because the way that I approach things is different than the next person. We all do things a little bit differently. So stay tuned. Tune in next time for that, and we'll see you then.